Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, coming to you from my place for a change. Our next live show is May 15th at 7 p.m. at Elsie's. Elsie's is our next live show, May 15th at 7 p.m. That's next Thursday.
We've been promising that you would go bowling against the first fan to arrive. Maybe this should be the time.
Have we been promising this?
Well, last year we did.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't remember that promise.
Yeah, why not? We got time. You got nowhere to go.
Yeah, well, I will have somewhere to go soon. Eastern Conference final. Unfortunately, we're not here in the second round of the playoffs, at least covering it personally, because the Wild bowed out. We were both at the Bill Guerin, John Hynes postmortem the other day, as we like to call it in the business. And what were the highlights from your standpoint there?
Well, I thought it was a little bit interesting. It was a lot what you expected to hear. And I thought one of the comments that Bill made was exactly the way I looked back at the series, where he just said, I thought we played well. I thought we did everything that we needed to do to win, and it just didn't go our way. And when he said that, it was exactly how I had looked back at the series. I'm sure you're the same boat, where for the last couple of weeks, it's been nonstop questions from people like, what'd you think this year? What was different this year? And it did feel different to me. And it felt like when you looked back after the loss to Dallas, after the loss to St. Louis, after the loss to Vancouver, after the loss to Vegas, in each case, it felt like the opponent was better. And I didn't feel that after walking away from the Vegas series. I thought Minnesota was just as good. Their stars outplayed Vegas's stars. Their goalie outplayed Vegas's goalie. Their special teams were roughly even in the series. And yet they still lost the series in 6. And I thought Bill's point was interesting, where he just said, you know what? They won all the close games. They won the 2 overtime games. They won the 2 one-goal games. Yeah. The 2 that were blowouts both went Minnesota's way. And interestingly, that's what's gone against Vegas so far in their second round series. They've lost the 2 tight ones. They've lost in overtime in game 2, where in the previous round, those bounces went their way.
Yeah.
And when Billy just said, if we get one of the 2 overtime games, it's a different series, and that's valid. So, and it isn't meant to diminish that that's a part of hockey. Like, you have to find a way to win the close games.
They didn't win the games.
But that was the way I looked at the series too, was that there wasn't a flaw exposed. There wasn't we weren't good enough here exposed. Yeah. It was a situation where at key points in close games, Vegas made the plays. They got a couple bounces. They got a couple calls. And I just found it really interesting. I don't know if you stayed up and watched the end of the game,
did.
too.
And the irony also of the Golden Knights, their fans or media, moaning about the officiating in last night's game. And I just think about how, people were coming after me after that Game 4. Let's be honest. Game 4 was the pivotal game. They were up 2-1. They want to go up 3-1. They're at home. They probably didn't play their finest, but if you look at every one of the penalties that were called against the Wild in that game, and I'm not even including the no calls, if you look at right before the Vinny Hinostroza penalty, he's elbowed in the face. Cross check from behind. The Eriksson Ek penalty, he's elbowed in the face.
Right.
There were just that was a poorly officiated game. There's a reason why both those officials, who by the way had a horrendous first round and were, I think, amongst the lowest rated officials in the first round, didn't move on. But that game was probably the most poorly officiated game in that series, and I actually think it really cost the Wild. I mean, you think about the hurdle goal.
The hurdle goal, right. And now there were some missed calls that went Minnesota's way too. The missed icing call that led to a Boldy goal that was, there were some calls that went the Wild's way. That was in Game 3. But there were some interesting, I thought actually the ones that were egregious were at the end of Game 6, where the Wild are trying to come from behind.
Brett
Johansson gets tripped for sure. Howden tackles Boldy along the wall. And it drives me bonkers when people say, the officials want to let him play at the end. They don't want to decide it. And I always say, you are deciding the game just as much by putting your whistle away as you are by making a call. And it was...
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? Guess who the Game 2 refs were last night?
Were the same guys.
Same guys that were Game 6.
So there's a no call at the end of Game 2 in this Vegas-Edmonton series. A no call on a clear trip. by Arvidsson in the corner
Yep,
that leads
McNabb
directly to the winning goal for Edmonton. You've decided the game just as much by putting your whistle away. And I thought it was interesting when you look at the way a couple of those first round series ended. The Dallas-Colorado series ends on a Dallas power play goal that was clearly a trip, but it was the trip that went uncalled at the end of Game 6 for Minnesota because an official didn't want to decide the game. There in that series, he makes the right call, and it leads to a Dallas power play. They score with 4 minutes left in Game 7.
The tackle.
Yes.
Yep.
And I just think that when you get spots like that it just felt like at the key points in the Minnesota series, those things went against them.
Right.
And they couldn't overcome it.
Yep.
And now clearly, if Gus Nyquist is onside in Game 5, I really think you're probably talking about a Wild win in the series, because if they win that game in Vegas and come home for Game 6 with a chance to win the series, I didn't feel like Vegas had the juice in that series to come from behind again. Now, when they came to Minnesota up 3-2, it was a different story. And Eichel had been awakened, Stone had been awakened, and you could go around and around on all the calls that have been missed. And I kind of feel like in almost every city, they've been complaining about the officiating in the first round, and it sure feels like more than other years. But I think when you just look back on a whole, it was a series that Minnesota played well enough to win. Probably the first time in 5 years that they lost a series in the first round where you clearly said they were good enough to win. They were as good as the opponent and just got beat. And, they lost 4 one-goal games, essentially. Right. The game one, Howden scored with like a fraction of a second left. But you lose 3 straight one-goal games, right. 2 in overtime, 1 where you had a power play in overtime, 1 where it also in that Game 4 you probably dominated overtime the first 10 minutes, and probably because you didn't score, you sort of tired yourself out. It does come back to, sometimes when you have close series, it's fraught with second guessing. And I do think that the way I think some of the decisions made in overtime to essentially play 4 defensemen in Game 4 in Game 5 to suddenly, after not playing your fourth line and your third defense pair for most of the third period, now you decide to roll 4 lines in Game 5. I mean, I just think there were, when things are so tight, you better make all the right moves. And I don't think all the right moves were made in this series. Yeah. And I didn't have a problem with the second point you made. The first one I thought was, and we talked about it during that broadcast that night in the Game 4 overtime, where it was, they clearly didn't trust Steve Buium, and at that point, but to shorten the bench that much in the OT, I felt like at the end, probably the last 7 or 8 minutes or so of that overtime, it really felt like the Wild were just hoping to get to the intermission and get to the second OT. I thought that was tough. And when they got a power play in that overtime and still didn't use Buium in that spot, it became evident like they just did not have any trust.
And that's why they react in Game 5 to suddenly deciding, all right, we're putting Merrill in because we trust him more. And then they decide to roll. And then the irony is it winds up costing them in that goal as well.
And that was the one that I didn't have a problem with it. I mean, it was a 4th against 4th matchup.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like they got stuck with their 4th line out and 3rd defensive pair against the Eichel line. I mean, that at some point you have to play those guys, and they learned that lesson the game before. So I don't think you can fault them for both decisions. You fault them for one or the other. In the second situation, they play, and I think they had some trust in the Trenyan, Brazeau, and Rossi line. They didn't play particularly well on that shift, but they had played fine. I think the one decision that is fair to second guess after the series was the way Marco Rossi was used. And I agreed with what they said, that it was more Hartman just played great and needed to be elevated. But I felt that when you bumped Rossi down, it at least at some point, it would have made some sense to say, let's throw Rossi on a third line with perhaps Marcus Foligno or Marcus Johansson or somebody, and play Gaudreau with the 2 big wingers and use them as a shutdown line. At least at some point, I would have liked to have seen, when they were trying to come from behind in Game 6, for example, I would have liked to have seen them make that adjustment more. I mean, I thought Hynes all year has been really good at having his finger on the pulse of the team. Who's going well that night? Who's struggling? Who should get more ice time? Finding spots to double shift Kirill or Boldy. And when you looked back after the fact, there are some times where it makes you wonder a little, because Gus Nyquist wasn't very good throughout the series, and yet he winds up with as much ice time as somebody like Rossi, who I didn't think was as bad as his ice time warranted. So there's some spots like that for sure. But it's interesting because there have been some games where afterward you'd go back and look, and it would just feel like sometimes a line would get lost, just timing, when there were special teams, when there was a TV timeout, and now you come out with your big guns because they're rested. And so there were some points in the series where I just felt like a fourth line just kind of got lost because
there was one game where Rossi didn't play the final 13 and a half minutes of the second period.
Yeah, and so I would have liked to have seen him find a way to use him more, especially when trying to come from behind. He's a skilled player.
They can say all they want that they like him and he's a good player and they trust him. They don't. I've been planting seeds on the podcast for a year that this is where it was going. I wouldn't be talking about a top 6 center for 78 games. And if I didn't have any sort of intel of what they really thought of him. And I think everything was said at that presser. Sometimes you got to just read between the lines. When you're asking about Rossi and Guerin's just talking about Hartman and doesn't say anything good about Rossi, you know that where they are, their trust level. And when he says that his goal this summer is to get a center to help Eriksson Ek and doesn't even bring up their second leading scorer that was a center, it shows you that right now in his mind, he is not part of the future of this team. Yeah,
maybe. I didn't read that one the same way, because in that case, I think what he's talking about is we need another center that can take some of the checking load off of Eriksson.
I didn't take it that way.
And I think which I think is valid. When you look at how much they had to use Eriksson Ek because they didn't trust Marco Rossi, Ryan Hartman, Freddie Gaudreau, any of the other guys they played in the middle at any point during the season as a guy that, so many nights it was, all these other guys are fine, but whenever the other team's best is on the ice, we need Eriksson Ek. And you look at how many draws he was taking in these games, it was because they didn't have another guy that they really trusted defensive zone face-off against either Hurdle or Eichel in this series. They wanted Eriksson Ek to take it. So I think it was more of I read that more of, we need a secondary guy that can be the shutdown guy so that we can free up Eriksson Ek to play some shifts against maybe a more of a defensive line for them. We can free up Marco Rossi or whoever the other top 6 center is, so that those guys can be used more in their comfortable role. And Eriksson Ek doesn't have to be the only guy taking every first face off of a penalty kill, every defensive zone draw at big points. And maybe just another guy with a little more size, so that you're not running both Gaudreau and Rossi or whoever else might be, a Urov, in that spot. Now you got a second bigger, more physical center that you can trust in those spots.
I asked Bill Guerin point blank during the presser if he could see themselves moving Marco Rossi, and he goes, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Look, there's contract talks or there's player movement, not just for Marco, for anybody. So I'm not going to try and predict the future and tell you, well, I see this or I see that. I'm going to have to go through the process and find out where it goes. And again, to convey, he is talking about their 23-year-old center that scored 24 goals and 60 points. When he says he doesn't know if he's going to move him, it means that he's likely going to move.
Well,
it's like, again, this is not
right.
Like, I'm just saying, we're not talking about Freddie Gaudreau here. We're not talking about Gus Nyquist. We are talking about a 23-year-old guy they drafted in the first round
in the top 10.
And he's not willing to say, no, what are you, crazy? I'm not moving him.
Right. But now let's just, to play devil's advocate, when we talked last summer, you were sure he was going to be moved last summer.
Because this is where it was heading. I
understand, but I'm just saying that when we talked, I remember being asked at a podcast, what's the percentage chance that Rossi's on the opening night roster? And you said like 8% last year.
That is not true.
It is true.
That is not
yes,
true.
It is.
First of all, I don't do percentages.
Last year we got asked at a show, and you said less than 10% that he was going to be on the team on opening night last year. And I'm not saying that you're wrong this summer.
No.
And I didn't. Last summer I just said I don't know. I'm going to say 50-50 because I'm not questioning that you have some intel and some sources, or that you did last summer. But I'm just saying that I read what Billy says is every door is open. If I get the right offer, and to your point, we're talking about a young player that if they truly believed in him, I agree with you. He's going to say Marco Rossi is a part of this future, period, and end it right there.
Like if you asked that about Matt Boldy, Kirill Kaprizov,
he's going to say, look, they're not going anywhere. But all I'll say is last summer when we kept being asked this, and I was like, they don't have a need to trade him. They don't have to move him. It isn't like they don't have room on the roster for him. If somebody calls and says, hey, we got this offer for Rossi, they're going to be willing to listen. So I just don't think they're in a position where they have to make the move. Now let's go back to, for me, speculation. You had said that you had some knowledge of what had been offered, where I was 100% speculating, just saying, and I threw out a number of 5x5. Now, if you've thrown that out and the player and the agent have said no, that probably puts you in a spot where, like, look, I'm not going above that. So now it forces your hand. So I think that's what he's saying when he's saying there's a possibility of contracts, there's a possibility of movement. If you get the right deal for Rossi, I think they sign him and keep him around. If he's unwilling to take what the team is willing to pay, well, then you have to consider trading him. And I think that there's a chance that happens too. And it depends. Part of this is on Marco Rossi. I know sometimes players always dismiss it and say, well, my agent's dealing with that. Well, the agent works for you. If you want to be here, tell him to make a deal and say, just make the deal. And I want to be here and be a part of this. I haven't talked to Marco directly. Maybe you have. So all I'm saying is that I'm not saying that you don't have sources or intel or digging into this, but I'm just saying there's no guarantee, because if the right deal's not out there, this isn't like Kevin Fiala where they had to trade him because there was no room for him. That's not what they're dealing with here. If the right deal's out there, I think they'll make the move. I don't think it's an absolute, like, we are digging in our heels. This guy, Matt Boldy's going to be Brock Faber's not going anywhere. Kirill Kaprizov's not going anywhere. They haven't made those kind of statements with him. But I still think you have to get the right trade. Otherwise, you're not obligated to make the move to get rid of him.
Yeah, well, the only leverage, though, is that they have time to shop for an offer sheet. And then, if you're Bill Guerin, when I look at the thresholds, a team is probably going to orchestrate it where it's like right below that 6-9 number, and then that's a first and a third as compensation. So let's just can you get a better than a first and third? Or
that's
equivalent?
Exactly what I was just going to ask. So now start to look around teams that would be willing to give a first and a third for Rossi, because that's essentially what they're doing by signing the offer sheet. So if you're a team that is likely to be a non-playoff team, well, your first probably has more value to you than a contending team, just because of where it's going to fall in the draft. And would a non-contending team be willing to part with next year's first and a third for Rossi? Maybe a team that's a little closer to contention. If you're a contender, would you do that? I don't know. I don't know if you're a legit contender, if you'd look and say, this is the final piece of our puzzle, is a guy for whom there are some unknowns. So I don't know how likely it is that somebody'd be willing to give that. What do you think?
Well, I just think that there's a lot of pressure on Bill Guerin to get the right deal if you get it done. I mean, let's just put
but
one
look at it from another team's perspective. If you were one, let's say you're a team like Buffalo or Detroit or one of those fringe playoff, non-playoff, would you give a first and a third for Rossi?
If I was worried it'd be a top 5 pick, probably not. But let's
say it's a 10 to 15 first rounder potentially.
I probably would.
Would you?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that's really interesting is like David Juracek deal. He was a 6th overall pick, and the Wild were willing to give up first, second, third, fourth, and a prospect for him. So, to me, in a lot of ways, Bill Garrett's, I'm not saying the Wild are going to get that much for Rossi, but he sort of set what a table would be for a
similar pick, 6th overall compared to 9th overall.
Only the one huge difference. One's accomplished and one is not.
Right. One's coming off a 60-point season. Right. So that's what I'm saying is that, let's say somebody calls and says, we'll give you a 1, 2, 3, 4 for Marco Rossi. Well, then you make the trade.
Right.
But if the deal isn't that, then you're not in any position where you have to move him because you don't have room to keep him.
Or you just wait for that offer sheet and say, well, we'll get, the better compensations in that. It'll be really interesting. I think they would love to get a player, but then, if they have aspirations to go out and spend money elsewhere, go get a JJ Peterka or something where you're going to have to resign and give him $8 million. Maybe what you are looking to get is trade Marco for even futures, but it'll be interesting. I can't even wrap my head around the teams that are going to.
When we talked about and we threw out the 5x5, and I just threw it out hypothetically, you said you actually heard that might have been offered. So now, after a playoff series like Marco had, do you think that either affected his trade value or affected his contract negotiation strength?
Well, I think both sides have hurt their leverage. One, the way that Marco performed in the playoffs, and two, the way that the Wild, like from a trade value standpoint, I think that the Wild treated him in the playoffs. I think other teams now know they want to move him. I think they now are concerned, well, if the Wild didn't think that he could perform in the playoffs, why should we give up a boatload? So if that's what you're asking, I think both leverage is wrong. The other thing that I'm curious about is I cannot imagine that if Marco even called them right now and said, all right, I'll take the 5x5, that the Wild would even do it. Like, I don't know if that deal is even still on the table.
Right. That's what I meant by, do you think his value went down in his leverage for the negotiation?
On this team, probably. Because right now you look at it and, Bill has been extremely transparent that he wants to upgrade the center position this offseason. I had Ben Hankinson on K-Fan yesterday, and he made it extremely clear that Brock Nelson would be intrigued by playing here, and we know the Wild have interest in him, so that's one. And then if you can upgrade elsewhere, you got Urov coming. Like, if you're Marco, you probably don't, and if you're the Wild, you probably don't see where he is going to be in the future, long term, Let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll get back on the subject. Hey, home repairs cannot wait. If you have flickering lights, gurgling toilets, virtually anything, Aquarius Home Services not only handles it, but handles it fast. And having a trusted plumber or electrician on call keeps your home running smoothly, which is why right now, for a limited time, you've got to take advantage of this deal. You could save $98 on electrical or plumbing repairs from the pros at Aquarius Home Services. That's $98 off. In fact, that's an interesting number, right? Maybe it's to honor the buyout payment of a couple $98 million deals coming largely off the books for the Wild. Who knows? But $98 off, too good of an opportunity to pass up, don't you think? So visit Aquarius Home Services right now to get started. That's AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
There are many reasons to open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union, including no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. Getting your $250 is easy. Open your account by May 31st, receive 2 payroll direct deposits of $200 or more, and you'll get a $250 bonus. See details and open your account today at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget. Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. Back here, worst seats in the house. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Elsie is our next live show. That's May 15th at 7 p.m. I interrupted you.
No, I was gonna say, all right, I'm gonna put you on the spot right now for what do you think the percentage chance is that Rossi's on this opening night roster in 2025?
I don't think he's on this opening night roster.
So you say 0%?
Because now it's also on his side. Like he's stung by this. And I think he's going to make it extremely hard to I just think that both sides are now motivated to probably be elsewhere.
Yeah. And the only thing I would say is that, and I threw this out, I think on last week's show, it might've been 2 weeks ago, where I was just looking at when I threw out all those comparisons of Rossi's first trip to the playoffs compared to what Kaprizov did in his first playoff, what Boldy did in his first 2, what Hartman did in his first 3. And I just think you're looking at a player that it was his first experience of Stanley Cup playoff hockey. The pace, the intensity, the physical nature, it's all different.
Right.
And he's not the first guy that has struggled a little bit with that. And he still did have 3 points in 6 games.
Yeah.
Did still have 2 goals.
The
and
difference with the other 3 is they never had their ice time cut.
Exactly. And yet he still produced
Yeah.
just like they did. So I'm not certain that if I was a different GM, if I was an opposing GM, I think part of their job is to always be able to look at the bigger segment of data rather than just these 6 games. Yes, flaws get exposed in the playoffs. There's no question. But I think most other GMs would be able to look at it and say, all right, so whatever happened in that playoff series happened. And I do think there's an element to it that Ryan Hartman just played really well, and he warranted more ice time. He warranted moving up in the lineup. Somebody had to move down, and Rossi was the guy. But I also think that GMs they're trained to look and say,
I'm just curious, like, where Gaudreau became such Teflon in this series, because it certainly can't be that he had 18 goals in the regular season, because Rossi had 24.
Right.
So, like, and if you look at all the analytics, Gaudreau did not perform defensively either. Like, I get he's more trusted.
That's what I said earlier. That was the one thing that I wish they would have seen.
Like, they're constantly, even at the presser the other day, they're Hartman. And like, what are we going to do? Like, where are we going to put him? And I'm like thinking to myself, like, I'm not going to get into a debate with them during a press conference, but I'm like, I can name one player that he could have at least elevated over, at least at times.
Yeah, and that's what the point I made earlier, that was the one thing that I just felt like there were a couple points where, especially when trying to come from behind, you've got a really skilled player in Rossi that, I get it. If you're trying to protect a lead, maybe you play Freddie Gaudreau more often than you play Rossi. But there were some times where they were trying to battle from behind, even in Game 6, where I just thought it probably would have made some sense to give him a little more opportunity.
Like, you know what? There was one play, like, so end of game 6, end of first period, Foligno to Hartman, unbelievable goal. And in the final minute of the second period, where they're trying to rally back from a goal deficit, and they threw out the Gaudreau line, I'm just like, what is going on here? Like, how is this not an automatic throw Hartman out there? Like, I don't know. Some of the decisions in the series, it was like, look back at the replay of that. Like,
I did go back and watch.
Like, the last shift of the second period, like, how do you not remember that Hartman and Foligno just had this unbelievable goal?
And I feel like in some points,
like, he just kept on trusting the Johansson, Gaudreau, and Nyquist line when none of them could produce.
Yeah,
the entire series. Jojo played well last game.
I thought Johansson was really good at the end of the series. I thought he was terrific. And Nyquist and Gaudreau were kind of the head scratchers to me, particularly Nyquist, who just didn't have it. And he wasn't the same player that the Wild had acquired 2 years ago. He wasn't the same player that scored 75 points last year. From the time he arrived, he just didn't look like he had the same foot speed that he had shown before. Looked like in this series he was fighting the puck throughout. There was one game where the puck just seemed to kept finding him, and he had opportunities but didn't finish. And as I said before, I think all year one of the big strengths that John Hynes had was recognizing each night who was going, and had this great knack for just a minor line juggle that got him a combination that produced. And in this case, it felt like they were really determined that somehow, some way, Nyquist was going to figure it out, and he just didn't. And
I just was, what I was shocked is, like, Bill Guerin mentioned the offsides right at the start. He volunteered it during his presser, and yet they never seemed to be bothered. Like, if there was any time to not trust him anymore, and like, I get it. It happens 1,000 times a game, But even his justification for it was bizarre the next day. Like, he wasn't wrong. But did you hear the quote? Let me read it to you. So I asked him about the offsides review, Nyquist, and he goes, I mean, obviously it's an unfortunate play. At the end of the day, it's on me to stay on side there. And from my view, there's a guy in between, and I can't really see the puck. And I was 1,000% sure it was over the line, obviously, and it wasn't. So obviously that's unfortunate. But those plays, this is where it got kind of funny. You can look at it different ways too. Those plays happen 20 times a day. And if the linesman, I'm not saying he should have called it because I like when they let it go like Braz's breakaway in game 4. So I'm not blaming the linesman, but if he calls it right away and gets it right, which is a hard call to make, but the play blows dead and no one's even talking about this. So he's basically saying, like, I want him to let him play because the Brazo play was blown. But let's be honest, nobody's blaming me right now if they just called me offsides at the very beginning.
Right, we had no idea what would have happened.
I mean, it was just kind of funny. And I'm just like thinking to myself, yeah, but you're also a 35-year-old vet that probably should know that you should straddle the line.
Yeah.
You know,
and what was weird to me was you watch hockey at any level, and it's just instinct for guys to stick a leg back toward the line. And a lot of times where they're so obviously onside that you're like, it's overkill.
Yeah.
And it was strange, like the vibe, the body language, like it never even, there was
like even the justification.
Didn't even reach back for it.
Yeah, like even the justification, well, there was a guy between me and Hartman, so I couldn't see. Well, that's even more of a reason to be careful. Like it was just.
Yeah, it was strange.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, like, you know, he never on that play thinks in a million years that Hartman's just going to drive to the net, bulldoze past Petrangelo and score the goal. Right? It was Petro. It was Barbashev in between, but I think it was Petro back.
That he drove around.
Maybe I can't remember. Maybe it was always Barbashev, but it, you know, and it's unfortunate play, but it just.
But those are that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that those were all the little things that went Vegas's way in this series. The guy does whistle down the Brazo breakaway. Now, who knows if he scores or not?
Right.
But it might have swung momentum even, or created a chance on a follow-up. You just don't know. And those were the things that in close games all seemed to go against Wild. And I'm not saying like the offside call was the right call. He was offside, and they challenged it rightfully and got it right. And,
but to your point, the Brazo one was not the right call, and the linesman was in a terrible
He was
position.
in a terrible spot, and to me, that's the one that is a head scratch. If you're in the wrong spot, then you better be damn sure you're right to blow it dead.
It was almost like instinctually the line was like, oh my God, I'm in the wrong spot, so I'm just going to blow it dead.
Right.
You know, it was like.
And I just think like Nyquist's point is a good one, where I've felt like since they've instituted the review, if there's even a shadow of a doubt in your head as a linesman, I like to see them just let the play go on, knowing that it can be challenged. Now that sounds simpler than it is, because now you put the onus on a coaching staff to risk an additional penalty you can't just tell linesmen in an instructional session, hey, when in doubt, just let it go. Right. You don't want them to do that. You want them to try to get it right. But there is that, just if there's even a sliver of a doubt in your mind, let it play on, because you can't go back and undo a whistle.
Right. And then, of course, the other side of it is, unfortunately, if you let plays go and it turns out to be offsides on a review, but there was a penalty in between, as we saw in one of the games last week, too, that's when it really gets screwy. Did you see the one where a goal was overturned, but in between allowing the offside, allowing the onsides, even though it was off, there was a penalty taken. So, and then a goal scored. But what happened is then they went, reviewed, disallowed the goal, but the penalty stood because they can't take that away.
The penalty had still happened, even though it happens in a vacuum, because those minutes are gone, because they go back to the offside to reset the clock.
It's hilarious. But, I mean, it's essentially happened in an event of a game that did not occur.
Right,
you know?
Exactly.
So
the whistle is back at 18:36 on the clock, and in this invisible 22 seconds that never actually happened, there was a trip.
It's crazy. You know, Bill made a really good point too about the impactful injuries. And he's not wrong. And we've been talking about this for years. You know, a couple years ago, the Wild have Eriksson Ek hurt. Hartman's playing on a knee injury, and the Wild moves Sam Steele up to number 1 center. Dallas, conversely, loses Pavelski. Suddenly, Tyler Sagan's moved up in the lineup. He's on the number 1 power play, $9 million hockey player. Very, very different. And his point the other day was, look, we had major impactful injuries that impacted our season. And the difference is, because we don't have the depth, that there's not a wave of guys, not that anybody can replace Eriksson Ek or Kaprizov, even on a normal team, but that his goal now is in these future years where they're not having $14.7 million in dead money is that now you're going to actually have warm bodies that are going to be able to replace, and that's how you're dealing with injuries in future years.
Well, it's obvious, and we talked about it a lot during that Dallas series. But $15 million, that's a third line. That's 3 $5 million players on your third line, and that is your depth. So that is when you lose guys above. That is the type of guy I think about whom he's speaking when he says we got to get some help, some center depth, so that, yeah, maybe our third line center is a guy that if somebody's knocked out in the top 6, he isn't totally out of place to be thrown up in that role. Maybe it's even a fourth line winger that's capable of, look at a Brett Howden for Vegas, for example, a fourth line winger, but capable of playing in the top 6 if all of a sudden somebody's down or you need help. And there's a guy who scored over 20 goals. Well, for the last couple of years, the Wild's fourth line has had to be made up with, last year it was guys making the NHL minimum, guys coming up from Iowa for the last couple of years. I mean, you think about all the guys that were in those spots. I mean, you're talking about the Beckmans and the Laukos and Husnudinov and guys like that, Sammy Walker, that were all guys that they kept trying to plug in on the third, fourth line. Vinny Lettieri. I mean, the list is long of guys that they had to try and throw into those spots. Now you can have $1.5 million, $2 million NHL players in those roles. Guys like Trenyon, who could play on the fourth line. Maybe he's not a top 6 guy, but he for sure could play on your third line. He's a middle 6 guy. And you just have the ability to fill your roster more effectively with players like that have, let's just say hypothetically, a Brock Nelson appears. If he's your third line center, he for sure could play in your top 6, maybe for long stretches of a season. And he might be in your top 6 all year. I don't know. But he's for sure a guy that if he's in your middle 6, he's capable of playing top 3.
Yeah, a lot of it's if they sign Nelson, a lot of it will depend on where he plays. A lot of it will depend if they also trade for a center. If they could go get a really quality
or if Yurov's
young
playing
center
in the middle
exactly,
and is ready. I mean, there's just, you have some more possibilities. They've got more. You just have the ability to fill a roster more effectively.
Yeah, and again, they are they are planning as if Yurov is going to be here. One, he's got to make the team if they sign him, but 2, they got to sign him, and that is continuing to be something that they're working on behind the scenes with his agent. Surprised that no changes in Iowa. 30th team last year, 29th this year, or could they get that vice versa? Same exact record. 31st to 32nd in basically everything. Goals for, goals against, power play, penalty kill. They've been a train wreck. Other teams, like the excuse all the time is, well, we have injuries, so it affects them. Other teams have injuries too, and it doesn't. And other teams finish higher than
had more significant injuries this year, without a doubt. I think it's what's the interesting part
did Devin Shore keep them from being the 18th or 16th or 14th best player?
Maybe Liam Ogren being up with the NHL as much as he was, guys like that otherwise in a normal season, maybe they're in Iowa more and producing more. I think this is kind of a year where things need to be different. And that's a trickle down too from, if you have a deeper NHL roster, by definition, you should have a deeper AHL roster. And we've been talking about how highly ranked the Wild's prospect pool is. A lot of times those rankings include guys that aren't in Iowa.
Yeah,
in
a lot
fact,
of times.
and most of the time in this case. So now I think this year you get a few more of those guys that are in North America that are either with the big club or in the American League. And I don't follow Iowa close enough to know what's really going on down there. But I do think it's important for guys to win together coming up. And then when they arrive in the NHL, they haven't just been getting their teeth kicked in the American League for an extended period of time. So it's hard for me to assess and say, yes, I think there should be changes here.
Yeah.
But I do think the results have to change.
Yeah. But to me, they've got to really take Iowa more seriously. And I don't think it's something that they've basically, other than, the best year that they ever had was during the pandemic. And then all of a sudden the pandemic stopped it. But essentially, they've made the playoffs once in 10 years. I mean, kind of twice. when everybody was making it, but once, and that's not good enough. And when you rave about these crop of unbelievable defensemen that were there, 3-4 years ago, the Lamboses, the O'Rourkes, the Spachiks, the Parrots, Damon Hunt, all these guys, and we haven't seen any of them make it to the NHL. That's not a good sign. And I just think that they've got to figure out a way to get that team. They've never had a coaching search really since Tim Army was fired. They essentially put Brett McLean there, and it's just it's a little surprising that they haven't made a move. Not that I'm not saying that I know that it's Brett's fault, but clearly they've got to be better. Jesper was not very good down there this year, and clearly Hunter Haight had a good year, but you look overall and not a lot to be proud of down there.
Yeah, I just think, and I go back to I just think it's important for an organization to establish a culture of winning.
Mm-hmm.
So get used to winning, expect to win, and when you arrive in the NHL, expect that winning to continue. And there have been a lot of teams that have built that way. I mean, look at Tampa. That we're at the tail end now of their crew, but that they had a group that came through the American League and won a lot together on their way up. Or you
go back even further. I mean, you look at all those Devils dynasties and the Red Wings dynasties. I mean, you had to prove yourself down in the minors and win together. And Billy was part of that back in those early Devils years. David Jiricek obviously had the lacerated spleen at the end of the year. They gave up a boatload for him. Didn't play very good down there. We saw him in the one game in Colorado where he looked really good. It looks like that they're going to try to figure out a way to get him on the roster next year. Obviously, he's going to have to prove it. He's going to spend a lot of his time here this offseason. To do this, they'd probably have to either move a defenseman or just, guarantee that essentially Zach Bogosian is your seventh guy. We don't know yet what they're going to do with Chisholm. I think it's probably more likely than not that they don't qualify him, but we'll see. And then Z Boyum, again, we got to look at him, but he's got to prove that he can make the team. And then Liam Ogren had a great year down there especially in the second half of the year, almost a point a game player. He's somebody, if he's not traded for a center or something like that, he's going to be, these are three guys that we might see get significant time next year.
Yeah, I think start with the defenseman. I think both Boyum and Jiricek will be given every opportunity to make the club. I think they'll never come out and say it, but I would think in the back of the Wild's mind that they're thinking we've got a spot for each of these guys as long as they show up at camp and don't play their way out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that does leave you Zach Bogosian as a seventh, and either a Chisholm or a Merrill or somebody like that as an eighth. And I think if this season proved anything, it's that you better have at least 8 defensemen that you're comfortable playing in a regular role in the National Hockey League. So I don't know what they'll do with Chisholm. I don't know, Merrill, I know his contract's up. I don't know if he's a guy that they'd look at would you give him $1 million to be your 8th defenseman?
Mm-hmm.
I sure would.
Yeah.
But not if Chisholm's still around. So that part's interesting. Ogren, I think he, to me, looks like a guy who's ready to be an NHL player, and maybe not like a major impact scorer in the top 6, but for sure a guy that he looks like his game is more NHL ready than the last time that we saw him for an extended period. And, maybe he's a third line type guy, but maybe he is a guy that has some value in a potential trade. We'll see what happens with him, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't in the NHL on opening night, whether it be here or somewhere else next year.
Let's do this. Let's take a quick break back here on the Worst Seats in the House. Have you ever driven past a piece of land and wondered who owns that? Or maybe you need to know exactly where a property line runs? That's where Onyx Hunt comes in, and it's not just for hunters. There are folks using Onyx for their jobs every day throughout the country. From farmers and ranchers mapping out their fields, wildland firefighters navigating rough terrain, to construction workers needing to know who owns what property, this app offers something for everyone. If you need the best land ownership maps, aerial imagery, and property boundaries in your pocket, Onyx Hunt is the tool for the job. Try it for free for 7 days. Download Onyx Hunt in the app or Google Play Store, or visit onyxmaps.com/hunt to get started. If you're looking for a refreshing THC drink, well, check out Giggly. It tastes like your favorite cocktail with no aftertaste and just pure, bold flavor. It's made with real fruit juice and all natural ingredients. It's a Minnesota-made gem. You can find it at liquor stores and Quick Trip locations across Minnesota, or get it shipped nationwide. Plus, with a new low pricing and low calorie options, it's the perfect guilt-free sip. Try Giggly today.
We love supporting local businesses. We love working with local businesses. I started buying stuff at Twill in the Edina Galleria a long time ago. When I started this podcast network, I was really hoping I'd be able to work with Scott Dayton, the founder and owner of Twill, and I was lucky enough to be able to do so. Now my closet is pretty much all Twill stuff. I don't get free stuff. I don't get discounts. I don't ask for discounts. I go there and pay full freight because I want to support a local business also because the stuff is awesome. Just bought a fresh batch. I'm about to go on a vacation with my wife. Everything I'm packing is Twill stuff because it wears well. It's comfortable. It doesn't wrinkle on planes. It doesn't wrinkle in suitcases. It comes out looking good. It wears like iron, and I'm never going to have to replace it. It's just so simple. Everything from from casual shoes to dressy shoes to golf stuff to dress stuff to suits. By the way, you get everything tailor fit, which really helps me out. And everything from, gopher stuff to winter stuff to summer stuff. They just have everything. So go to twillandthen.com, sign up for email updates. They won't send you anything unless they have a very specific event they want you to know about. They won't spam you. And go in there and say hello. Tell them we sent you. It's just a pleasant group of knowledgeable people. They are experts at what they do. It's the best men's clothing store in Minnesota. Go check out Twill online and in person in the Edina Galleria.
All right, we're back on Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Our next live show, again, is May 15th at 7 p.m. At Elsie's. So looking forward to that. Are you looking forward to that, Anthony?
I can't wait. I love going to Elsie's.
Are you going to be there on time?
I'll be there before 7 o'clock.
All right. Let's see. What Kirill Kaprizov. I mean, Bill Guerin continues to just voice it loud and clear. He said it on K-Fan that in his eyes it's a 10 out of 10 that they extend him. And he made it very clear to us that he's confident that he is. We heard from Kirill as well. He also sounds like a man that wants to resign here.
I think it's 100% that they have a deal done. All the things that we've talked about make too much sense. They can give him an extra year. They can give more money than anybody else. He likes it here. He wants to stay here. I think he believes that they're close to taking the next step. And I think there is I guess you should never say zero, but let's say a 0.01% chance that they can't get a deal done. I'll be absolutely dumbfounded if they don't have an extension done this summer.
There's two ways to look at the Ryan Hartman situation. One, that he saved his tenure here in Minnesota, or two, that he really upped his value and that they now will actually continue to look to move him. What do you think happens? I mean, I think to your point, the one thing that was very clear from Bill's presser is that he knows it's time to make some bold moves, that he's tired of sitting on his hands. He's been constrained here for the last 4 years. We saw this trade deadline. That was something that he had sort of bits and pieces, couldn't really dig in the way that probably he wanted to, that he could have if these guys were out for the rest of the year. And now it just feels like anybody could be moved this summer. I
think for the right deal.
Yeah,
for
other
sure.
than the cornerstone pieces.
But I would, and I haven't talked to Billy or John about this, but Ryan Hartman was a different player when he came back from the suspension. He took his game to a level in the playoffs that I think is what had teased the Wild a couple of years ago. He was that kind of player. If it were me in that exit meeting with Ryan Hartman, it would have been, this is who you can be. This is the type of player you can be. This is the pain in the ass opponent type player that you can be, that can also make a play and score. We could see you playing in an elevated role in our lineup with skilled players if you can bring this 82 nights a year, not for 6 nights in the playoffs. So why not go have a great offseason, work your butt off, come to camp in the best shape of your life, and let's let her rip next fall and see where you fit. Maybe you fit playing with Kaprizov and Zuccarello again, like you did a couple of years ago. Maybe you fit playing with a Foligno on an absolute beast of a checking line that can hit people, but can also create offense and make plays. But it's on you now to prove that this is who you can be, not the player that we've seen lose your mind from time to time, disappear from games from time to time, disappear for stretches of the season. Be this guy every single night that makes it impossible for us to leave you on the fourth line. And if he can do that, now you've got something. And I keep in the back of my mind going back to that grief line of a couple of years ago. Why couldn't Ryan Hartman be a part of a line like that, along with Marcus Foligno, and who knows who the third piece would be, that could just be an absolute pain to play against, that could go up against the other team's best and make them pay by being able to score. Maybe he's a top 6 guy. I don't know. But what you saw in this playoff was a guy that had that next level to elevate his game in the playoffs. That is the reason why the Wild were excited about him enough to give him the contract they did. So I think that's where I would be if I were the Wild. But at the same time, if somebody else saw that in him and said, hey, we're interested in Ryan Hartman, I think you listen to anything about just about anybody during this offseason.
Which I want to get to 2 guys about that, what you just said. But Bill Guerin said that's the Ryan Hartman we need. Stayed composed and did not give the other team give in to the other team trying to push his buttons. He has that ability. We need him to be more like that guy than the one that flies off the handle and sometimes blows a gasket, is essentially what he said. Do you think that based on the injuries and based on the fact that maybe some extra money this summer would really help in terms of trades, that maybe you look at maybe moving a Jonas Brodin, look at a Jared Spurgeon, maybe changing up the makeup of your blue line? I was one I was thinking of is they don't have any nastiness on their blue line. Do you maybe look at signing a Ryan Lindgren, but before that moving a Jonas Brodin?
I'd have a hard time doing that. I think I wouldn't be out shopping those guys. Let's just say if somebody came with a blow you away deal, you have to listen to anything. But I think if you were trying to get some nastiness on your blue line, I think that's where you maybe go challenge a Jake Middleton. Like, we need you to be more this guy, not the guy jumping up in the rush trying to make plays. We need you to be the guy that stabilizes everything back there physically. That's the guy that is sticking your nose into those kind of spots. And he was at times this year, but you probably need more of that from him. But I think what we learned in this Vegas series is that as big and heavy and strong as the Vegas lineup was, Minnesota didn't get overwhelmed by their size and strength. And so all the talk about this defensive core was going to get exposed because they aren't big enough, I didn't see that at all in that series. Vegas couldn't get to the middle against Minnesota any easier than Minnesota could get to the middle against them.
Until Game 6 when it mattered.
Right. But this was one of the heavier teams in the league. Yeah. And I thought the way that Brodin and Spurgeon were able to play and didn't get worn down or beaten down. Now, this was one series, not 4, which, that could take a toll on them too. But I think Brock Faber is only going to get better. And he's certainly not lacking for strength. I think David Jiricek has to play more of the size of his body from what we've seen so far. And I know his MO is more of a skilled player, but he does have some size. And he's going to have to play, I think, a bigger style than he's shown before. Because then you can win with skating defensemen. I mean, there have been teams that have won in recent years that, yes, they've had a couple stabilizers back there, but they've also been built largely around skating defensemen and have won doing that.
Yep. Jeffrey Martin asks, would they ever consider doing what Toronto did and giving Kaprizov the C for signing an extension? I mean, I don't think they would take it away from Spurgeon if Spurgeon's still here.
Right.
I really don't. But that's not Bill's MO. But I mean, maybe. I mean, if let's put it this way, if that was the difference to Kirill Kaprizov being the C or signing or not, which it's not.
It's not.
But then I guess all bets are off. But do you think, let's put it this way, when it's post Jared Spurgeon era, and if Kirill is in year 2 of an 8-year deal, do you think Brock Faber is the next captain of the team, or do you think it's Kaprizov? I mean, I still always go back to the fact that when he got the A over Eriksson, Ecker, Brodin, Bill Guerin just said plainly, he's our best player. And the only thing that's happened since is his leadership has absolutely, jumped. His English is incredible. He talks in the locker room. He's obviously their hardest working player on the ice in practice and games. I mean, could you see? I've always thought Brock Faber is the future captain of the team. Next one.
Yeah, I've always thought the same thing. And
could you see Kirill?
I could see it, but if I had to guess right now, I'd say Brock Faber's the next guy. And Kirill will lead just because of the way he plays, but I don't think he's the type of guy. And I know he's been more vocal behind the scenes from everything that we've heard. He doesn't seem like the type of guy that on the bench during a game is going to be talking to teammates a lot. He seems like it's more, he's going to talk to his line mates about how in the world did we not score on that shift? And how about we try this next shift? That just seems like more I think he comes across as the guy that is going to lead with confidence, but not necessarily have to be the C to be a leader.
They have a lot of actually good candidate. I mean, Foligno is another one that we're not even talking about that might be the captain. And sometimes Chad wants to know what you shot today at the trail, which was, you sent this yesterday.
Yesterday, we only played 9 holes, but I had one of my better 9s going until we hit, I don't know what happened. We were playing the back 9. I was 1 under after the 16th. So 2 holes to go. And we had a 30-minute wait on the 17th tee box. I don't know what had happened. Yeah. There were 3 groups waiting on the tee when we got there. It disrupted my rhythm, and I finished bogey to finish 1 over on the back 9.
It disrupted my rhythm, too.
Exactly.
So we had an 8:30 podcast yesterday. I pull into his driveway at 8:28 and get a text message from Anthony being like, "Come on the last hole," and I'm like, "Well, then I'm going home." So,
well, and I feel badly about that. It was a little miscommunication though, because I thought I was going to text you when I was done and we were going to meet there. Careful.
I put this. I had to go on. If you heard that was my tripod. That's now a what would that be called? A bipod.
A bipod.
Yeah.
Well, it's a bi and a half pod. You only broke half the leg off.
One leg is broken. I had to just go on Amazon.
It was a pretty coordinated play you just made.
I know.
It was trying to take your hat off and broke a microphone.
So no, the mic was already broken right before you got here. I went on Amazon and bought a new one. All right. Ryan goes, do you ever wish to cover a different team? Is there a team that you'd find more interesting, or is your loyalty to Minnesota? I can imagine Minnesota gives you great bits to creatively write about. Yeah, I mean, there's no other team that I want to cover. I mean, obviously, I think we all want to cover long playoff runs, but I mean, I hate to say it flippantly, but part of my cool role at The Athletic is I still every year get to cover the long runs. Like I am leaving to cover the Eastern Final and then the Stanley Cup Final with Pierre LeBrun and Chris Johnston. So, I mean, I sort of get the best of both worlds, but in terms of day-to-day coverage of any other team, I can't imagine working in another market and another team. I mean, you know, this is just a passionate fan base that also has treated The Athletic incredibly since I got here.
Well, I love the fan base. I love their passion. And for me, this is home. It's been home. I've lived within 200 yards of where I live for the last 30 years. I've lived in a 10-mile circle for my entire life, other than 4 years of college. And I'm the luckiest guy in the world that this opportunity came in my hometown. I can't imagine going and taking the same job somewhere else. I really can't. I mean, I love my job, and the fans are, I know we've joked about this a few times, because when the team loses and the fans lose their minds, and, you know, a lot of times it's because the TV guy is unwilling to say he thinks the coach is an idiot. I don't know what that has to do with how the team plays on the ice, but I love the passion of Wild fans. The number of conversations that I've had walking around town in the last week and a half about how exciting this season was, it has just reminded me time and again how cool it is to work in a market where the fans are this knowledgeable, this excited, this into a hockey team. And I can't imagine working anywhere else.
The Thriller 97 goes, any chance Flower and Billy convinced Crosby to come here for a year or two? We need a number one center. Don't you think if he ever leaves Pittsburgh, he's going to Colorado to play with Nathan McKinnon? I mean, what would be the
I can't imagine
draw.
a scenario where he comes here.
Yep, it'd be awesome. Steve Prow asks, could Riley Height be a factor in the Wild thinking on Rossi? Not saying Height is ready now, but if he makes the team, that would give the Wild 2 smaller centers on the roster. I mean, first of all, with Riley Height, I sort of got to see it to believe it. He clearly wasn't ready last year. That's not to begrudge him. He was a teenager, 18, 19 years old. I want to see him play in the minors this year and how good he's going to be. It's hard for me to get all excited about Riley Height based off my history watching Adam Beckman. I mean, Adam Beckman came here, best player in the Western League, led them in goal scoring. It was 100-point, all that stuff. Everything that Riley Height's done was Adam Beckman. Different human beings. But like until we see that Riley Height is actually going to be a great pro, we saw it a little bit in the prospect camp last year where he looked really good. Then in training camp looked like he was not anywhere close to ready for the National Hockey League. What's the percentage chance that Wallstedt plays more than 20 games in the NHL next year? I'm sure they're hoping. I mean, they gave him a one-way contract at 2-2. They are going to get some Wallstedt insurance, but
he's going to be the number 2. So I would say it's 98% he plays more than 20. I think when they look at Philip Gustafsson, loved everything they learned about him this year. At the same time, I don't think they want to ride any goalie for 65 games. So my guess is the goal going into the year would be somewhere around 55-30-ish split would be, I think, an ideal.
4 quick hitters, really quick, because Anthony's got to run. One is Jared asks, you said the organization wants to extend Gustafsson. He makes $3.7 million right now. What would you ballpark his next contract AAV at? Probably in the 5.5 range, I would guess. That's what the going rate is, 5.5, 6.
Although there are some guys who have signed for less than that lately that surprised me a little. And, even Freddie Anderson just re-signed at a remarkably low rate. Now he's a different point in his career.
Gus is 26.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the term. I mean, maybe you can get Gus for a lower AAV by giving him a little extra length of contract.
Sam Bennett gets mentioned as a free agent target this year. He had a career high in 51 points, was minus 15 on worst faceoff percentage of Rossi. Why did anybody make sense? I think the playoff player. I mean, he is a playoff player. I'm not convinced that Florida is going to let him go or that he's going to leave Florida. We will see. They always seem to figure out a way to get guys on home run contracts based on where they're at. But the other thing is there's going to be, if he becomes a free agent, there's going to be so many teams that go after him. Last question. This is coming from Skylar, wants to know each of our big plans for the offseason.
You're going to Spain.
Yeah, we're both going to Spain.
I've got a few things going on this
There's something
summer.
that's more important right before that you've somehow forgotten.
Well, I haven't forgotten, but I've got a busy summer for a guy that has scaled back a little bit. I'm working fewer Twins games this year. I do have a couple. I've got some Twins series coming up about which I'm excited, but I've got a wedding in our family. So we've got an engagement party in Denver to celebrate AJ's engagement. His wedding's a year away. We've got a wedding with my daughter Gianni in June. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff with that. We've got our Donkey Classic. We've got a trip to Spain. So the summertime is disappearing quickly. The weekends are filling up quickly. I'm really excited about the off season and before I am going down to Tampa to do a Twin series here at the end of May. So we've got a lot of stuff on the calendar, but I'm clearly excited to see the first of our 4 kids get married in June. And then go spend a week in Spain listening to all the Michael Russo wisdom for a week.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait for Spain. I got a trip to Hawaii. I'm also going to Milan for the NHL Media European Tour in sort of mid to late August. So that'll be a good one. Next live show is at Elsie's. That is on May 15th, 7 p.m. So hopefully everybody comes on out there. Thanks to our incredible sponsors, Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, Clamshell Beach Resorts, Giggly THC Beverages, Onyx Maps, Twill in the Edina Galleria, and Royal Credit Union. Talk to you next week, everybody, at Elsie's May 15th.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world